This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Welcome to From Guilt to Good, Self-Care Solutions for Busy Caregivers, the podcast rewriting the narrative of self-care. If you're a caregiver feeling stretched thin, torn between responsibilities, and longing for self-care, you're in the right place. I'm Jeanette Yates, fellow caregiver and someone who spent years doing all the self-care things and never really feeling any better. After years of research, self-exploration, and trial and error, I finally found a way to create a sustainable self-care practice that makes me feel good, not guilty. And in From Guilt to Good, we'll explore how you can do that too. Together, we'll hear expert insights, actionable steps, and hear heartfelt stories to guide you toward rediscovering your worth, reclaiming your health, and getting back the life you've been too busy to enjoy. And today, I am very excited. This is a very special episode. I have invited my good friend, colleague, and fellow caregiver, Rachel O'Brien, to the show. I'm going to be doing these types of episodes periodically, but Rachel is a caregiver, and I'm going to allow her to share her journey with you, not only her caregiver journey, but also how she navigated her own care through that journey and her grief journey as well. So she will be sharing how she has taken care of herself as she's gone through that grief experience and how she juggles all the things with being a mom, an educator, an artist, an encourager, all of these things. So she's a multitasking caregiver like the rest of us, and she has a lot of insights and wisdom to share. I know she's been very supportive and helpful of me in my caregiving and self-care journey. So that's why I asked her on today. Hey, Rachel, how are you?
Good. Thanks for inviting me on. Excited to chat.
I know this will be we get on Zoom calls and stuff for work all the time. So this is going to be a little bit of a different experience, but we are familiar with figuring out how to talk to each other through screens. So, all right. So I did a brief kind of intro. Is there anything else you want to share generally about yourself or your life before we jump into your caregiving experience?
Sure. Yeah. I am a homeschooling mom of 3. I grew up with 2 parents who had autoimmune diseases and kind of navigating all of that. And just there's so many things that I do now that I've learned and I've grown and I've experienced that have changed who I am now. So at the time it seemed really, really hard, and it was hard. But looking back, it's just crazy to think about how much that has shaped me and changed me to who I am now as a mother, as a friend, as everybody who I am, like all those pieces that put together.
Well, and something that you just mentioned now reminded me, your parents had autoimmune issues, as mine did as well. So, and you also now have some health issues that you are dealing with, which is another reason self-care is so important for those of us who are caregiving for parents, for children, all of those types of things. And so that's another thing that you bring to the podcast here today. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about that. Now, tell us a little bit about what your caregiving journey looked like, because it was a little bit different than mine. And so I'd love to just have you share that with us.
Of course. So my mom was diagnosed with scleroderma, which is an autoimmune disease that essentially puts a bunch of scar tissue in your body and hardens your organs, your skin, makes it hard for your body to function. And so when she was diagnosed, I was 15. I was learning how to drive, taking her to bigger cities to find out what was going on because they didn't know for a long time. Yeah. And so I had 2 younger brothers, a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old at the time. And so when she was finally diagnosed, it was very jarring. They gave her 5 years to live at that point. And it was just like, I remember praying like, God, can you get her to see me graduate? Can you get her to see me get married? Can you get her to see me have a child? Like
Yeah.
she made all three. Like,
Yes.
like the woman was a fighter, like for sure. Like she made it 17 years. So, and it was because she was her own best advocate. And so that was what was kind of unique, is that she kind of let me grow up. I mean, she did. I
Yeah.
didn't really know a lot of those details until I was like married. I was in my mid-20s before I really started to learn what all the intricacies of her disease were. Like I knew essentially the big overview of it.
Right.
But she took care of herself. Like my dad was not her caregiver. She took care of herself. Like he was like, love my dad, but he just wasn't. And so she took care of herself, and she still worked jobs. She went back to school at the age of 39. She never went to college, went back to school, got a degree in counseling, got a master's degree in counseling. Like, so, and she was still raising children. Like, I
Yes.
mean, we graduated, like we had graduation parties for like my college and my brother's college and my husband's college and my mom's college, like all simultaneously. Like it was just
Right.
boom, 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 you know? So, it was really neat to kind of like go through that whole journey. But as I think she knew her time was narrowing down.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more it narrowed down, the more she would share with me. And so she would start sharing the different pieces and like, this is happening to me and this is challenging and I have to do this to overcome it. And like, the thing about scleroderma is it's very, very different every patient. So there's
Mm-hmm.
no medication for the specific disease.
Right.
And you just have to borrow from other stuff. You have to borrow cancer drugs. You have to
Yes.
borrow arthritis drugs. You have to try all these different things. And there's no just like one
Right.
thing fits all, you
Right.
know? And like, and they and all these symptoms like tack onto themselves.
Yep.
So she had one really rare thing that like 3% of scleroderma patients had.
Right.
So, you know, it was just all these weird stuff.
So it was
So
important for her to teach you about all of this because it is so difficult. And that's one of the things that caregivers have to deal with as well, especially when there is everybody has a unique experience with whatever diseases or conditions that they have. But when you become the caregiver, you have to not only keep track of your own health, but now you're also filing all of that stuff away for your loved one as well. And that can be a lot of stress. But it sounds like she was preparing you for the time that you would have to become a more involved caregiver. And how did that transition happen from her being her own caregiver, her doing her own self-care? She sounds like she would have been a great guest for the podcast as well. To then needing your advocacy for her.
Yeah. So Super Bowl Sunday of 2017, she was life flighted from her home into the hospital, and they couldn't take her to her preferred hospital because her oxygen levels were too low.
Mm-hmm.
And they told me, keep living life as it is. She's got a really bad virus that's caused her to have this pneumonia. Just keep doing life. We don't want you to catch this. Like, we'll let you know when you can come visit her. And so I had a 8-month-old baby and a 3-year-old baby basically at home. I was working, I was training a new employee, like all the things.
Right.
And so I was like, and I was 2+ hours away. So I kind of just went with it. And I was like, okay, I mean, she'd been life flighted before. She made it through. Like, we're fine, you know? And so I waited, and she wasn't getting better, and she was getting worse, and she was getting worse. And now they're medically sedating her. She can't, like, she's not been able to talk to us this whole time. And they decided to put her on a vent, and like all these things kept progressing. And finally, like, I went thinking this was the last time I was going to see her. Like, I was like, I got to go see her. Let's go. So I found like early childcare for my babies, and I hopped in the car and I drove over there. And I get there. It is the most excruciating thing ever to see, like, your mom's unresponsive. She can't do all these things. It's really, really hard. Have to gown up and all that. Like, this was pre-COVID, but we had to do all the COVID protocol back then.
Right.
And so gown up and all the things and go in, and I find out that they are doing like huge things that they shouldn't be doing.
Right.
So I'm like, hold on. Has no one told you can't lay her flat?
Right.
She'll aspirate into her lungs, which will complicate the whole thing. And they're like, oh no, we have to move her. And I'm like, no, you don't.
Right.
And so then we've been like fighting with the care. I ended up making a Karen's top 10 list and posted it by her bedside. It was like, you have to look at these 10 things before you care for her. Like, I would try to talk to all the nurses. Like, so I'm doing all this, like, I'm doing hours of phone calls, long distance, talking to every nurse that's in her care. I'm lining up like family and friends to drive like an hour and a half, 2 hours to go spend with her, so they can like look at the list of top 10 and make sure they're doing all these things.
Right.
And so it's just like this So I used to say that I had a PhD in Karen,
Yeah.
because I really, like, I knew all the things because she taught me. But my dad hadn't thought to tell them that. He was just like, they know what to do. They're
Yeah.
good. And I'm like, no, you have to be your own advocate. Like, you have
Right.
to be.
Well, one of the
And
things that you just said there that I really like and I want our listeners to hear is that, again, you had young children. You were 2.5 hours away. Obviously, you were able to get there, but you couldn't stay there.
mm-mm.
You had a family that needed you at home. And so what I hear from that is you set a boundary for what you were able to do and what you were not. And you asked for help from other people. So that's where those friends and family members came in. And I think as caregivers, a lot of times we feel like if we're the caregiver, we should be doing all the things ourselves. And that isn't always the best thing for anyone or everyone. And because your mom had prepared you and you knew, and you're also a very organized person, I know this about you, you were like, I can make a list, I can set up a schedule, I can do these things. And I also love, you talked about how your dad was around. He was, with your mom, caring for your mom as her husband, but he didn't really have the capacity to put on that caregiving hat that we often think of. But I love how you talk about it as like, that's not, that was his capacity, right? Had to do what he had to do for him and for how he was coping with his own grief and probably confusion and all of this kind of stuff. And so I think as caregivers, we can also have that same grace for ourselves to understand what we are able to handle, what part of that caregiving hat we're able to put on, that support. What part of the care team are we going to be? Are we going to be the person that shows up and makes the list and talks to all the nurses? Or are we going to be the person that holds the hand, says the prayers, communicates with the family members? That is okay. And so I love every time you've shared that aspect of your story. You've always had so much grace for your dad in that moment. And I think that's so special and important. And I know he's not the articulator of words all the time, but I know that he appreciates that. So, okay. So she comes out of this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We end up, I remember making this decision or helping make this decision because essentially my dad had the decision power.
Right.
But I was like the chief, like I was a VP. Got to make I talked to all the doctors, or he'd get mad at the doctor and then I get to talk to the doctor on the phone.
Right.
Like all the things. And so I would have to counsel him and this is I think this is the way we need to go. And this is why, and this is her history. And this is how it all plays together.
Right.
And so we kind of worked together, to make, he had the final decision, but we worked together to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember being, watching my kids play on a playground. It's like it was yesterday and it's been 7 years, and I walked back and forth with a baby in a carrier talking to a doctor about why we should put a trach in. I knew my mother would never want a trach, but that was the best chance to move her forward.
Right.
And so we did that and she turned around a corner.
Mm-hmm.
Her last term was 91 days in the ICU or long-term acute care.
Mm-hmm.
And she went from completely sedated, can't breathe on her own to weaning herself off the vent twice and learning to stand up and start to walk. I mean,
right.
she could, she talked to me one time in that whole process, her
right.
actual voice through the trach.
Mm-hmm.
So she was an incredible fighter. And so we still didn't know it was the end because she just kept rebounding.
Right.
It just kept happening, and so you're okay, we're going to make it. So yeah, it was really, and then there were some things that happened at the end that it was okay,
yeah,
we fought this fight. It's over and it's going to be okay, but it's really hard, but that's where we are. So,
yeah. So now I want to turn to talking a little bit about how you walked through that grief with your young children.
Yeah, it was so heavy. They talk about wilderness seasons,
Mm-hmm.
2017, it had nothing on my 2020,
Right.
Because it was really hard because not only the last time I was able to actually talk to my mom where she could respond back, I told her I was expecting baby number 3 that was whoa, this is a blessing, but that wasn't what we were expecting in the storm of all these things.
Right.
So, like my son turned 1 on my mom's last full day here on earth. So we canceled his first birthday party to go be with her. And so like I have a baby, I'm pregnant. So all the things that come with that. And then I have a, just turned 4-year-old. And so we have all these things going on and trying to figure out how to navigate loving on them and dealing with this really, I mean, it's crushing, like grief can absolutely crush you. Like I've talked to so many people over the years now, and I always say that like, it's going to feel like you can't breathe right now and you can't come up for air. And that's normal. And it'll take some while, it'll take time, but eventually those waves will not completely knock you down and you'll be able to like smile and laugh thinking of your loved one, not feeling like you can't breathe and you can't move forward. And so it was just incredibly like just the whole year, like working through all of like sorting out all of her things and doing all these things, and all of it's long distance. Like I didn't live close to my like 2 hours from my parents' house. And so my dad was like, I'm going to sell the house, come sort all of our things. And I was like, oh, okay. So again, I had incredible help from my aunt and some friends who just, stepped in. And then I had my third baby a week before Christmas, and talk about boundaries. I had to say, we're not traveling this Christmas.
Right.
And there was 2 big reasons. Number 1 was I have a 1-week-old baby. I don't want to go anywhere. But number 2 was like, I had never not been at my mom's house on Christmas Eve.
Right.
Every Christmas Eve, all 33 years of my life, I'd gone to sleep on Christmas Eve at her house, even with a husband in tow, and woke up Christmas morning at her house. And so I was like, I just can't bear to do that without her. Like I have to set my own traditions. I have to do my own things. And so the last 6.5 years, this will be, I guess, Christmas number 6. My new rule is like, sorry, relatives, like you figure out your Christmas things, but I will be at my house on Christmas Eve night, and I will be at my house Christmas morning, because that's the time I need for me and my family.
Right.
And that's my new tradition. And that's what I have to hold on to move forward without such heavy, crushing grief. Like, this is okay. This is my new thing.
Right. And I love that you tied your new tradition into the tradition that you had with your mother. So you're using that experience with your mom to create something new with your own children. And I think, those of you listening may not think of this as self-care, but if you heard what she said, this is what she needs. This is a ritual that she's creating that is part of her self-care. She's building and honoring, her mother in this different way. She's setting up her new tradition with her family. They're going to know that, on Christmas Eve. So I bet when the kiddos are grown and they're married, I bet the first year they're going to come home for Christmas, because that's what they know. And so I think that part of establishing our own lives is part of the way that we honor our parents. And in your case, you were honoring your mom after she had passed. But for some of us like me, my mom had we had good family traditions when I was younger and she wasn't so sick. And it's hard to make new traditions, and she's still where she is. She can't always get to me, but it is important to continue building those same memories with your family that you had. Or maybe if it wasn't, I'm also speaking, some of you maybe didn't have great traditions. Hey, it's okay to start something new. It's okay to do something new. And so, it was interesting when you were talking about like you find all this out, you find out you're pregnant with your third child. So a lot of times here on the podcast, we talk about like, you just take care of yourself because you're worth taking care of, like regardless of everybody else. But also in your case, it was like even more important that you got the rest you needed, and you got the food you needed, and you got the medical care that you needed, because you were also already caring for someone else. And so that was so important for you to do at that time. And it sounds like you had a great support system around you to help you do that. And you also were able to, which always makes it easier to set boundaries. I think it's easier to set boundaries when there's people around you saying, yes, I honor that boundary that you need to set. And, I can come in, or I can support you in that. And so let's turn a little bit to some of the specific self-care struggles that you've had, because, it's been 7 years, But that is a journey of grief. So it's not like after the first Christmas, everything got better. There's still the birthday celebrations and the different anniversaries that pop up. And so how have you continued to focus, think about your mom, honor your mom's memory, but also focus on the things that you need to focus on, including your family, including your self-care? How has that happened over the last 7 years? What have you learned?
Yeah, I've learned that it doesn't ever go away. Like, I'll still have times that like it just hits me out of the blue and I'm just gonna cry and then my husband's like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "Just let me be. It's fine."
Yeah.
Like, I just need a moment to just like miss her and wish that she was here and I could talk to her. I just need a moment. And sometimes it's the most random things.
Right.
But in the beginning, it was like people would ask me questions, or I would just think of her, or I'd pick up the phone to call. Like, my worst days were so hard because I wanted to pick up the phone and call her. And I'm like, that was a person I called and I can't call her now. And this is stinking hard. And so I would, those would be my hardest days because they felt like they were like piled on. They were exponentially harder. And
Right.
so I learned in time, like, okay, well, if I'm not going to call my mom, who am I going to call? And I would I'd have a list of 1 or 2 people that I knew that I could like confide in or I could talk to. And I actually have the closest girlfriends now I've ever had because I think I'm missing that piece. The closest friend, the closest person to me was my mom. So now I've had to form new relationships, but they've been really life-giving. They've been really great. But I also have been really aware of trying to share with my kids. Like, one of the most heartbreaking things for me is that she barely got to meet. She didn't get to meet the last one named after her. But she, barely got to meet the other 2. And so I feel like they won't ever really remember her. And so I'm trying to always like infuse stories. And at first that was really hard. I tried to tell them a story about her and then I just ended up crying.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay. But like I infused stories about her and like help the memory of her live on by doing little things. Or did you know that your granny KK used to sing this song when we went to Hit the Road, Jack? We'd sing that when we go places. And so we like sing that. And there's all kinds of different things. But also what became really powerful for me was being able to talk to other people. I instantly felt like I had a bond with anyone who lost a parent early.
Yeah.
I felt like instantly, hey, you're in my club. I know you don't want to be in this club, but you're in my club. So come here, let's talk.
Right.
And let me tell you what I've shared. So me sharing my journey with them actually was probably some of the most healing things because then I was able to like process things I wished I would have done in her last days and able to give advice to other people or like, tell them what you appreciate about them. If you think this might be the last time you see them, tell them what you appreciate about them. Lay it all out there. It's like get a voice recording of something that they're saying to you. I kept all my mom's voicemails because I never knew when the last voicemail was going to be the last one.
Oh, wow.
And so a lot of them are like, hey, we missed again, but I found a couple that were really special that I forwarded to my email and I have forever. And, just her talking and telling me she loved me.
Yeah.
But just being able to find little things. And what I've also really been more cognizant about, and some of that's on my health journey, is like my stress level. So when I feel like I'm getting crazy stressed about something, especially in my grief, I have to find a way to kind of like not shut it down, but it presents like, let's find something that is going to bring me joy or peace in that moment. Because the more I get, I used to cry for hours. Like I would have my heart rate up for so long. My eyes would be dry. Like I'd have to find ways to like, I love to do my nails. They're not done today. So I wish I would. But like, I found little things like doing my nails, which seems so like frou-frou, like whatever. But it was like 15, 20 minutes. Like when you have 3 small kids, 15 to 20 minutes to yourself is hard.
Right.
But I'd be like, okay, I'm going to stay up 15 minutes late and I'm going to do my nails because I love the pretty glitter on my fingers all day long.
And you can't do anything else when you're doing it. It's like the perfect way to stop multitasking.
Yeah.
That's my biggest issue with doing my own nails is I get like little antsy, but you're right. It's very meditative. It's very, it can be, introspective, so that's really good. And like you said, it's 15 minutes. It's not a long time. On the outside, it seems like you're doing your nails, but on the inside you're healing, and, I love that. That's the kind of self-care that we're talking about today. We're talking about healing. So like a lot of people would, whether they're feeling grief or stress or frustration, it's like, I just want to push it down and walk over it. I want to just get through it as fast as possible. And while we do want to move through whatever we're feeling, it is going to take time, and we have to learn to take care of ourselves well as we process grief, as we deal with stress. And so what you've shared today, I think, is so powerful, because so many people think, once my loved one is gone, I'm not a caregiver anymore. And it's like, well, yes and no. I think the journey shifts, and I think you're in a different mode of caregiving. I think you become like the mentor, the the wisdom of the uh caregiving club, as you said. There's this club. And so I really appreciate that you took the time today, and I appreciate that you were able to share about your mom. And I'm glad we have this now permanently on a podcast for so that other people can hear your experience and hers, and just how different caregiving journeys are different. The way your dad experienced caregiving, the way you experienced it, the way your children have watched you be a caregiver. I think all of those things are part of the journey that is unique. And I'm so thankful that you've shared it with us today. Do you have any other encouragement that you would like to share to caregivers who maybe they have just lost their loved one, or maybe they have that anticipatory grief? We know, when we know it's coming, we just don't know when. Do you have any encouragement for them today?
Yeah. It's hard. What you're going through is incredibly hard, and that's okay. Like, to recognize that it's hard, but it's also, take some time to sit in those feelings. Don't, like you said, don't push them away. Like, take some time to sit in those feelings, but then be able to do the things you want to do, say the things you want to say. That's, I think, my biggest advice to people is, just lay it all out there. Tell that loved one what you appreciate about them. Tell them some fun stories. Like, I recently visited a friend that was a neighbor that was in hospice, and I made a whole list of like fun stories that we had experienced over the 16 years of being neighbors. So tell some fun stories, some things that stand out in your mind that really are going to always impact you and are going to be big for you always. And like I said, the voice recording is awesome. If you can get them to write something, that's fantastic too, because you make a lot of cool gifts out of writing.
Yeah.
But I just think knowing that when you are in that stage, you don't ever know. We don't get to determine the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't ever know when the last is going to be the last. But just to savor those moments, it's easy to get caught up in the medical jargon and the different things and the stressful decisions. But just take some time to be with the person and just to sit with them. And even if, like, for my mom's case, she couldn't talk. She was on a vent. She couldn't talk most of the time. Just sitting there, being with her. Sometimes I'd read my book and she'd watch TV, or I'd read my book to her, or, we just do something like just being in their presence, because that's the thing you can take with you. You
Mm-hmm.
can't take things with you, but you can know that how you treated someone or how you were there for them made a huge impact. And so, and if you are struggling with grief, just know that it's a journey and it doesn't ever go away, but it will get easier. You'll be able to tell those stories and keep telling those stories. I think the sign that I can tell that people are working through their grief is that they're able to tell stories about their loved one without crying as much. They probably are still crying a little, but not as much. Like, I've watched some friends walk through that recently, and one of which said, "I'm not dealing with this." And I'm like, well, you might not be dealing with the general public, but you and I have had like 6 conversations in the last 3 months about your dad.
Right.
So I know that you are processing it and you are working through it. And that's healthy and that's good. And like, sometimes I feel like people might think that I talk about my mom way too much, but like, I don't want to lose her. And by being able to share her with people and share her stories and share our story and share the fun things that made her her, then I get to like relive that, but in a positive way. And that's actually like giving to me.
Right.
To be able to be like, hey, I had this awesome mom and I want you to know about her because she was amazing. Like, so.
Well, and I love that you also were talking about just some of those times that you spent with her. But what I'm hearing from that time that you were with her, even when she was on the vent and not able to communicate well, is that wasn't done out of a sense of guilt, as a sense of, expectation from her. This is what I feel I need to be doing, or I want to do for my mom. And I think that's a big shift that we have to make as caregivers when thinking about, caregiving and where the boundary is. You have to know what's enough for you. And then that's what you do. And because there's expectations, maybe not from your loved one, maybe from the medical world, maybe from your relatives, maybe from TV, I don't know, just your church, I don't know. But there's all these expectations from everywhere else, but you know what caregiving you need to be doing. Just learn to listen to yourself. And that's a lot of what we do in the Self-Caregiver, is learn how to pay attention, define caregiving and self-care for ourselves, so that we're not doing these things out of a sense of guilt or, if I don't do this, someone's going to be mad at me. It's about, I'm doing this because I'm giving care, whether it's to my loved one or to myself.
Yeah, it would have been easy for me to feel like I had to drive 2 hours every day, that I had to drop my job or I had to do whatever and go there every day. But keeping my job and taking care of my little ones, I knew was part of what was going to get me through too. Like that bit of normalcy. Sometimes you have to have a bit of normalcy in the chaos to be able to continue to move forward. But yeah, 1 day a week is what I could do. And that's what I did. And that was what I was able to do. And I was able to line up people to be with her the other days. And I don't look back. I mean, yeah, if I didn't have small children, I didn't have a job, I would have went and sat with her every day. But it also was one of those things that I know that those pieces of normalcy is going to help me through this journey as well. And so I was able to make it all to work and not look back and not feel bad that I didn't get to do more, because I did just enough in that time.
Yes, just enough. We are always enough. We are doing enough. We are enough. Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining me today. I really appreciate you. And thank you for listening today. The From Guilt to Good podcast is a proud member of the Whole Care Podcast Network. To access additional self-care resources, including the Self-Caregiver Community, of which Rachel is a part, all of these things will help you feel good, not guilty. Check out the show notes or head to theselfcaregiver.com. Subscribe now and join me in going from guilt to good as you rediscover your worth, reclaim your health, and get back the life you've been too busy to enjoy. And if you've enjoyed this show, please take a moment to leave us a review. Your feedback matters. We're redefining self-care for caregivers, one episode at a time. Until next time, remember, you are worthy of the same care you give others.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.